All right, Dan, you ready to kick it off?
Yeah, let's go and get this going here.
All right, let's do it. Hey everybody, thanks for joining our call today. We're really excited about today's topic. So just kind of first off, my name's Leo Adams, co-founder of Skylink, drone community and professional services marketplace, and definitely want to thank you guys for being here today. Really excited to be here, and I know last week we had some link issues, so I apologize about that, and we hope that and we appreciate you coming back, and we're definitely really excited. We hope that you find this information helpful today. And we'll be going over some industry use cases and drone LiDAR customers who's buying them. Starting off, I'd like to thank Dennis for, being on our call today. He's a MODUS team member. You'll be helping us moderate the Q&A and the chat room. And we'd definitely like to thank Dan as well, who is our drone LiDAR expert, the owner of MODUS, and a 20-year aviation and mapping expert. So thank you guys for joining, and I'll go ahead and hand it off to Dan here.
Okay, well, thanks, Leo. I'm going to move forward here just a little bit. So, for those that need a little structure and figure out what we're going to do today, we've gone through a little bit of introduction, and then today I'm going to go through a little bit of overview on providing a little bit of structure for these different use cases. We'll go through a little bit of summary here on trying to actually personalize this information for you, so that you're not just following somebody else's, you're actually able to innovate and integrate this kind of technology and other types of drone technology into your business. So again, for some housekeeping, I asked earlier before we actually kicked off, but if you have questions pertaining, go ahead and get that in the chat so Dennis can look at that and Leo can look at that, and they'll cue me and see if we can add that into the content here that I'm going to provide and answer there. If for some reason I can't, or I don't catch it, that does happen. I get wrapped up. I'm really excited about this stuff. Then we'll reach back out to you after the webinar or training session, and we'll get you your answer there. So I hope that helps. And without further ado, let's get moving. So again, this is right now we're going to cover kind of who are the customers and really more about industry and use case. But coming up here next week to get back on time schedule, we'll have the drone LiDAR equipment. So I'm going to break down the solutions that are possible today and start to point out the different merits on, do you want a $250,000 sensor, an $80,000 sensor? What software lends to speed and accuracy, and how do you make your money back? Because even though these are expensive systems, you can charge a lot more for them, and they provide more data quality that your customers want. And you'll see that today a little bit, but now we'll break into more of the equipment and how do you field your company. And then the last one, which I'm really excited about in this free training series, is best practices. So this is getting into the planning and considerations as you get ready to go out and bid on a job, and that kind of thing. And then some other live events coming up. We got Kansas City with Kansas State University, one of our education partners. This is an A to Z introductory course where you're on the equipment and fast-paced environments right through the workflow. And won't make you an expert, but it will definitely open your eyes to how you want to approach this kind of technology and where you want to go with it if you do it all.
Yeah, that'll definitely be a great training. I went ahead and threw the link in the chat, so if you guys are interested, feel free to take a look, check it out, and definitely think it'll be beneficial for those considering adding LiDAR to their service offerings. So go ahead and check it out.
Excellent. All right, so let's get into overview here. So I'm going to follow a simple formula today. I mean, we're going to see a bunch of different sensors, and we're going to go right into the point cloud. So we're going to go back and forth between the slides that you have here. So this is not going to be a static event. I mean, I would love to put the software into your hands and we could all do it together like my regular training series. But in this particular case, we're going to go back and forth between our PowerPoint slides today, and I'm actually going to bring up a visualization tool, which is a Quick Terrain Reader. It's free. Leo, remind me, and I'll make sure we get a link. Or Dennis, can you get on SharePoint on OneNote and pull up the free link for Quick Terrain Reader. And what this software does is, it's probably one of the best ones for three-dimensional visualization of a point cloud. There's other viewers out there. This one is really simple to use. When Dennis was training folks on LiDAR and synthetic aperture radar, the students who were like 19 and fresh out of high school, no college training, could pick up this software very, very quickly. So for visualization, we're going to be using that tool today because it really is the government gold standard on that. So that's what we're going to use. Oh, excuse me. How do we get there? Let's get back on track here. So we're going to go, like I said, we're going to go back and forth between the slides and covering some of the things that we see here and actually getting into the point cloud. And I'll start talking about features and how to look at it. Because of the time constraint that we have today, I'm not going to go past visualization. I can talk a little bit about classification in that, but that's really another series. And each one of these use cases that I'm going to show today could really be a 2-hour training session all by itself. So I want to get you a lot of information to give you a taste, but we're not going to delve into the side scans and advanced visualization and using intensity versus color and how that works in this session. If you want more of that, put in the chat and we'll try to arrange a way to get that to you in a way. So, but again, moving forward here, we will go through what the individual client or industry sees as a problem. How does this technology help kind of solve that, and what is that use case? So we'll try to define that for you. We'll break down a little bit about the drone that we use, the sensor, and planning considerations. You know, and even how did we select our point density and why? Because as you guys will learn really quickly, your data requirements should drive everything that you're doing. Go into some planning and safety factors, and like I said, we'll toggle back and forth into the visualization and key aspects. All right. Okay, nothing in the chat yet, good. So without further ado, let's move forward. So the first one that I want to cover today, you know, is remote infrastructure. And this client, Japanese firm, they came to us, oh goodness, 2.5 years ago when we were actually working with a different LiDAR engineering partner. And so this is the early days when we started to put together a LiDAR and an INS solution to generate point clouds on a drone. What's interesting about this particular use case is, you know, I lived in Japan for about 8 years, and the site that we're seeing here is right outside of Nikko, which is to the northwest of Tokyo. And so as you can see, the topography here is really, really hilly. And we've got a different type of vegetation, and this is an important factor. So the type of vegetation here is matsu trees, which is a really, really dense pine tree. And they're, because everything has been logged pretty much everywhere in the world now, they've been planted, so they're really, really tight together. And so you're going to see that in that point cloud. And again, I want you to pay attention to this particular point cloud because, again, this was something that we produced 2 years ago, and our technology is getting better and better, still using the same sensor head. But getting back on track to what we're seeing here is you have this really steep terrain. You know, the underbrush that you're seeing under here is really hard to move, not to mention that your trees are really packed close together. And then if you look at the terrain here, this is really steep. So a traditional survey crew that are going to be doing survey lines and something like this is going to take them weeks to get up and down if they can access it at all. You can see if you look at this picture here, which is on our UGCS flight automation tool, that you can see the drop-offs into the river. You're not going to be able to access that. So when you're looking at the topography around the infrastructure, one of the reasons why you'd use a drone, one, it's affordable cost, but it's also to get access. You can't get a helicopter down in here in a safe, meaningful way, and to be able to move in a fashion that's going to allow that sensor to collect reliably, or in a way that you're not going to have to do a lot of cleanup. So these guys, when they came in, they did this flight in, I think, about 12 minutes. They had very little training because at that time we were still learning how to automate this process. So they, it was very interesting. And we had to do a little bit of work to do the bore sighting and the data and stuff like that afterwards. But again, when you look at this flight profile, which this Google Earth doesn't really show the how steep this really is, this kind of access was kind of unheard of. And this was one of our early success stories. So what we're looking at here briefly is about 2.5 miles of track that they've done. And they did this in less than 12 minutes. It took us a little bit longer to post-process because at that time we didn't have the bore sight automation built in. But typically a project like this today, after the fact, you can get your raw data in about 20 minutes. By the time we compile the telemetry and fuse the piece into there, or fuse the LiDAR data in there, it's about 20 minutes. And then if you're going to do some geocorrection, you may have to download some GPS correction files, which aren't that bad. But again, at that point now, you may be talking 30 minutes. So that's not bad to get to your raw cloud. The other consideration before I move into the cloud itself is over here, this chart. So again, like I talked about, we're dealing with vegetation. And so these folks really didn't look very closely at their airspeed. They didn't look very closely at their altitude. But if you're going to do a project like this, and we're dealing with this dense vegetation that I'm talking about, at that point, if you can see my mouse and we look at this point density curve, you're going to want to be close as that is humanly safe. So 20 meters, which is about 60 feet, may be a little bit close. You maybe want to be around 30 meters in this particular case. If you're not using a piece of flight automation that allows you to terrain follow, then you might want to be 40 to 60. But I want to point out here what that does. The higher that you go, the less points that are actually going to be returned, and that is just a factor of propagation and how likely you're going to get the proper reflectance off of the terrain below to get this density back. There's some other factors in here that are a little more advanced, but this is the basic concept that I want to leave you with. So why is this important? Well, when you're looking at this type of terrain, this type of vegetation, and this goes back to Alex's question, you want to get as much poke through as possible. So one way you do that is, like we're showing here, how much energy, point density, can you get into the terrain and then get back? And if you're doing bare earth, which is a brown, you're going to be looking at about an 80% reflectance. That's great. You're going to get a lot of this 350 points, 1,000 points per second back. That's great. But if you are looking at vegetation, well, now you're looking at maybe 10, 20%, depending on how densely packed it is. So again, you want to increase your chances of capturing whatever your intent is here. So you'll see that here in just a few seconds. And this is one of your chief planning considerations. So for vegetation, you want to be really high. Maybe for topography, you don't really care. You only need a few points depending on what contour you need. If you're doing reality capture, which is what this is really going to be, because we're going to be showing you the bridge that came in here, then you're going to probably want as many points as you can, at the resolution that you have. So it depends on your engineering specs.
Hey Dan, we have an interesting question. So obviously with the terrain this steep, did you have any problems with loss of GPS lock? And if so, how did you mitigate that?
Great question. It depends. Yes, you can have those issues. I see those more in city structures That's a great question. And this is something I'm going to cover next week, but I'll give you a quick tidbit here. When you're selecting your equipment, the INS that you choose as part of that integration package is everything. So it's good that you have a GPS, and that has to have a certain level of accuracy. And the IMU, the inertial measurement unit on board, has to have a certain amount of inertial fidelity. It can keep track of very minute changes for your telemetry piece. But another piece of this in that sensitivity is the IMU helps fill in the gaps between GPS hits. And so the more refined that it is, and the better that it can hold its awareness, I'll just leave it at that for right now, the better it is that you're going to deal with filling in those gaps. And so one of the things you'll ask is, how much lost time can you have? For a drone, it doesn't seem like it would be that important. But your question right here is a perfect example of when you're in that type of topography, yeah, you may lose GPS. And the question is, for how long could you do that and maintain a clear solution? So we'll cover that next week, but you kind of got the secret for a part of next week's topic. So good, very good question. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to toggle, if it will let me. Okay. All right. So here's our point cloud that we've for our bridge, and you can see we have only one half of the scan. Now, mind you, let me go back here really quick. You can see they only made really one pass. There actually was another piece in here, but for what I'm going to show you today, we only did one pass. And so when we look at this, I'm going to take the color off. Oops. There we go. It doesn't seem like a lot here, right? And sometimes, using intensity will help you pull out features. In this particular case, just to show you, this is a lot of data points, very tightly packed. When you look at the scale, they were moving at about 7 meters per second to get this time done. And they were probably about 30 meters, if I remember correctly. But as you start to add, so we start to add some color. So we have some information you can start to see and break out some of the features here. And you can see the bridge is looking really good. If we were to pull this into CAD, which we had, I think we were looking at around 2 centimeters of resolution. So that means that all the spans and all these points were really nicely spaced where they were measurable and had a tolerance of 2 meters. So again, probably not engineering grade, but if we're talking about modeling and GIS applications, this was great. Now, if we start to bring in here and start to toggle in some more feature, now, this is what we call a colorized height model. And you can start to see, we can start to bring in some structure. And if I was to do this now, you can start to see these individual trees to start to break out. And at this point, we can actually start to classify. So this goes back to Alex's question. We can start to look at these and start to take the side print of that. You can start to see the terrain here. And so we use a side profile technique to select the terrain and start to separate trees from ground. So again, doesn't seem like that impressive until you start to get in and start to look at the level. I mean, we have the road underneath, which is important for any DOT and infrastructure piece. And you can actually start to see the foot trails that we actually are broken into the path here. And even really the color markings on the road. If I can get it, let's see if I can show it to you guys. For the chat, everybody, are you guys able to see this, or is there a time lag? Because that will change how fast I go through the cloud. Thanks, Dennis. All right, if there's no time lag, I'll keep coming in here. But you can start to see we've got the berm right in here. That's a measurable item if you're doing DOT. And you can see we even have the hillside here, which this part, folks, is darn near impossible without to image it and survey. So that's the real big deal here. The other piece of this is we'll start to get into bridge structure as one of our early. And okay, we got another car. We've got this whole intersection in here. But you can start to see we have the lattice structure, stay rods. I mean, this would be really hard for a lot of companies to get their hands on without maybe setting up a terrestrial scanner. But the reason why you couldn't use terrestrial here is you really don't have any clear shots. You could shoot here, you could shoot over here, but there was nothing that was clear enough to really get an accurate shot with a terrestrial scanner. So again, this is a really good case on how you could use aerial LiDAR to get this information and get moving on that. Another part of this, comes down to while we got good structure on the vegetation, we've got enough structure to replicate the roads and actually put this into like Civil 3D or some kind of CAD software. Probably the biggest testament is the amount of safety. The workers here that did this engineering work were totally separated from this. The amount of safety that was involved here, where they didn't have to get into this terrain and try to set this, was huge. And again, they did this in less than 12 minutes. I think they had engineering product by the end of the week. So again, for an early testament, this was a great success story on why and how you could use this. And in some of our follow-on courses, we actually show some of the processing and what you could do with pulling out the digital elevation maps, canopy height models, and even tree counting. So there's software that will do this fairly easily with a little bit of cleanup, but not too bad. So yeah, and here's that trail I should try to show you guys. All right. And unfortunately, being one of the first models we did, there was no ground control and there was no accuracy, absolute accuracy. So we don't know how far off the plane this was, but we do know that the relative accuracy was around 2 centimeters. And that really comes down to the visual acuity of the sensor. All right, cool. All right. So I'm going to pull this one down. Yep. And we'll come back to this here. All right. So, in kind of a continuation of this, let's get into a little bit of transportation. So transportation is an interesting piece. I mean, if you look at this industry, we already have LiDAR that is on mobile mounted units. And so it's a pretty established process to be using much more accurate LiDAR mobile scanners than what we have here today. So why would I show you this? Actually, we're going to go through 2 examples with this. Because, when you look at scanning and you're looking at either terrestrial or mobile scanning, the way this collects is it collects the road, so the sensor's turned down at a 45-degree, and it shoots outward to collect the road, the down slant, and the berm. However, if you're getting into, and you'll see this in the cloud today, right now we have this abutment right here. And the whole point of this project was to do an expansion. So mobile scanning for this intersection would get up all this, but once it went driving by here, you're going to have to spend a lot of time to get back and around all this other stuff. And with all these hills, the scanner is not going to get all of the top piece. So what they needed was they needed a area scan from a top down so they could get topography. And they were looking for, I think, 2/10 at this point, 2/10 of a foot. So, you know, I would not say that this technology right now, because of the current regulations, is a replacement for mobile scanning. But when you're talking about setting up the bidding and the planning, you know, for cut and fill, and when you're trying to get off the berm a significant distance so that you can plan, let's say, in this particular case, what were the urban effects that they had to take into account. Another thing they would want to look at is environmental considerations. So they're going to want to map this area and figure out what the runoff and the sediment is going to look like. They may have, as they're doing their planning cycle, they may have floodplain and flood issues they're going to want to look at. And I think I talked briefly about, but what's the watershed? You know, so how are they going to set this up so that not only during the construction where they're setting up their drainage and their sediment cloth, but also afterwards, how is this going to flow either into, if it's more urban, because we had the city of Warren over here, how is it going to flow into the blue water drainage, or how is it going to flow into Farmer John's field over here? So these are all part of the considerations you had to think about, or your client is thinking about when they're looking at this data. And again, most of what we did was scanning the road, which is a whole nother piece of the consideration. But really the point was to capture the outliers, you know, and to do this through the vegetation. So one of the things we did was we made sure that this is deciduous, and one of our classes we talk about vegetation management or planning around vegetation. In this particular case, this was spring, so we could get away with using the Velodyne. We did it on the M600. And what that allowed us to do with the two returns is we could map the vegetation, but we weren't constrained by this deciduous canopy like we may have in, let's say, June. But again, I'll talk more about that in other courses that we have. So again, we came back to you know, our point density planning here, and the interesting thing was that, you know, for the road, we could be all the way, we could be 80 meters, and this would get us a sweep width of around, what was that, about 150, 140, 140 meters. So this would be enough for one pass to cover the entire road. However, we needed to look at changing the profile for the vegetation over here. And so at that point, you know, we would want to be looking at maybe 40, 30 meters. And in the planning for this, it was really important to figure out what was tree height. So as a safety consideration, one, we had pattern of life. That doesn't mean that we were flying over people in the terms of the FAA rules, but we were flying over pattern of life. So that means there was no pedestrians, but we did have traffic. And so we had to figure out the time of day for the least amount of impact. We had to pick our flight profile very precisely to make sure that if there was problems, what were our emergency situations? So if we look at this model here, you know, we set up right here on this centerpiece, and this was fairly easy, very low risk, low pattern of life type of concerns. But also we already had emergency landing situations or mitigations over here in this field. Now, as we went up over the top, we had line of sight concerns because this actually is a large hill, lots of vegetation. So you can see that we actually raised our altitude, and that wasn't for coverage because I really didn't care. I was outside of my collection area. But at this point, I wanted to see the drone. Oddly enough, one of the things that we didn't consider but became, let's just say, a concern, is we had a lot of birds that took extreme interest in what we were doing. But luckily, you know, the condors and the hawks and the raptors that we had didn't really mess with it too much, so we didn't have to enact any kind of emergency protocols here. We did have a battery failure or battery alert, which activated an instant for us, this is our emergency procedure. As soon as I get a battery problem, it's an instant return to home, and if it's imminent failure, I land immediately. Partly because I don't want to hurt anybody. That's the primary concern. But the second is when you're flying in a sensor that expensive, you really want to make sure that asset recovery is at the top of your list. Oops, excuse me. All right. So, and then we flew down this way, and we had emergency landing points over here, and over here. We didn't use this spot because what you didn't see, it was a 1,000-foot tower sitting over here. So one of our planning considerations was not so much about hitting the tower, because I think, you know, the drone automation was tight enough that we didn't have a concern there, but we were more worried about RF interference and what that would do. So one of the things that we relied on, obviously, was wave point control. And the situation was if we lost signal, we would let it go, understanding that we had other waypoints loaded in. But we were watching that with great interest. And then the last piece of this is, because we're talking about altitude here, and tree height was a concern, we took out a small, tiny little Matrix first, or Mavic, and flew this route, because it only took us about 15 minutes to do. You know, we turned the camera to straight and turned on the crosshatch, and the first thing we did is we went up to kind of to test our theory on how high the tree was. And once we figured out how high it was from home point, then we went and flew this route to just validate that we didn't have any other safety concerns. So this is something, especially with these higher paid clients, that safety is paramount. You got to be thinking about this stuff and showing them that you have these type of safety considerations put into your safety management systems and your operational risk profiles. And so this is something that Dennis will tell you and Leo will tell you, that when we talk about site planning and we start teaching this stuff, your safety management system is a major consideration in looking at this in this piece here.
Hey Dan, we have a question. Can external lights or lasers affect LiDAR performance? And I mean, in general, what external factors could affect the LiDAR sensor's performance?
Could you repeat that question real quick?
Sure. Can external lights or lasers affect LiDAR performance? And in general, what external factors may affect the performance of LiDAR sensors?
Well, because you're flying so low, your atmospherics have a very low impact in comparison to aerial. So if you're flying at 2,000 feet or 3,000 feet, cloud-based aerosols will affect your returns. And so at that point, if you're looking at like the Regal Vux long range, or you're using MTA2 or something like that, then there's software that they use to filter out some of those aerosol effects. Other lasers, you know, unless they're on the same harmonic, they're not going to impact. It's actually, and I would say that it's highly unlikely that that even the same laser system is going to impact, since we mount multiple lasers, or excuse me, multiple scanners onto our mobile systems and do dual collect to increase our point density. So another laser scanner of like type doesn't even affect it, because of the way the timing and the time of flight actually work. But things that do affect it, obviously, is the reflectivity. And like, for instance, if this road was wet, that would have an issue. You know, different if it was covered with certain types of material like dust and sand and silt, that may affect it. So there are things that will affect it, but overall, the big ones, which is aerosols and airborne particulates, isn't really a big factor, along with you know, mutual destructive interference and that kind of thing. All right. So again, so this is our cloud, and what I want to do is kind of start to quickly go through this one. See if I can find it for you. There we go. All right. So, and thank you, Leo. I see that we're little low on time, so we'll kind of go into this. So you can see here that, I mean, this is Velodyne data. So we had one control point, and I'll say that one of the biggest things that I took away from this project, for you folks that are doing this professionally, if you don't have your embedded survey team in here, and we set our control point here off of a monument that was staked. For this project, even though it took us maybe 30 minutes to do the actual acquisition, it took us 2 hours to find the survey points. And then it took us a week after to work with the surveying team to figure out what datum, what grid, so that we were all referenced correctly. And on delivery, we were actually on the wrong reference from what they wanted. So they were asking why we were a foot off. And if you're not talking on the same plane, if you're not, in this particular case, this was California, I think State Plane North, you know, if you're not using the same references, that's a big issue. So being able to talk to a surveyor, being able to make them understand what you need to get this is really important. And anytime that you can, adding control points to validate your absolute accuracy is really important. So what you see here, since we did off leaf, is you can see how much penetration we got through. So filtering out these trees is really easy. Filling out this pattern of life is easy, and because they really stand out. Let's see if I can do, well, I'm not gonna get into that right now. I'm not gonna get into how to kind of really look at this much more than just some quick visualization. These right here are cars and semi-trucks. Those can be filtered out. They have very distinct patterns. And again, we would look at it from a side scan, either this way or this way, and just cut it out. Auto-classifying would take out most of the trees, you know, but again, they've got all this structure, because this is actually a bowl. When we look at this way, and this is why this was so hard, you know, they couldn't get from a mobile scanner, they couldn't get the tops here. And what they're going to do is they're actually going to cut all of this out and set up a bridge and a turnstile. So they needed to figure out for their engineering bids and drawings, you know, what the toe was and what the peak was, so they could set this span. So that's why they had this. And you know, again, this is a Velodyne, so an entry level, and this exceeded their expectations. You know, again, the project took about a week just due to setting up the right project deliverables. But the whole collection here was just a 2-hour project on site. So this was really quick, where traditional surveying would be out there staking forever, and then putting it into Carlston and stuff like that. So at this point, any other questions on this one? Okay. All right, I'm going to take this one off. All right. So this is still transportation, and I'm going to go through this one quicker. And the reason why I put this one in, this is one of our clients up in Washington State that's using the Minibucks with great results. And you can see quickly, I mean, this is Velodyne data. So you're talking about, again, 2.5 centimeters of relative accuracy. This is 10 millimeters, or 1 centimeter of accuracy. Whoops, excuse me. So why that's important is you don't, depending on what your customer needs, you don't need this. It looks great, and I'll show you the cloud here in just a second. You know, but you know, for marketing images, this is fantastic. But it almost is overkill on the points per how precise the points are to figure out the topography. Now, in certain cases, we're dealing with dirt work and stuff like that. Having that amount of resolution in your scan is important to figure out, you know, if you're dealing with sedimentation, or you're meeting with spec, or the relative accuracy if you're trying to figure from curb to curb or something like that. then this stuff is really important. But overall, if you're using basic topography, and you're looking at, let me think on this for a second, 6-inch contour to a foot contour, the Velodyne is going to do you very well and has a higher return. Again, same flight profile, and I'll show you that here quickly. But this was 3 miles of track that they did, and they did it in, I think, 12 minutes from what they told me. Flew it at 5 meters per second and at about 50 meters. And the big thing with this is when you look at this sensor and its use case, you can fly a lot higher. So you can be right up at 400 feet. The other piece to look at here is the point density. So it is lower, but the bigger thing with this is you're getting higher accuracy and you're getting up to 5 returns. So in this particular case, when we look at this and we do like some vegetation analysis, you're going to get more of the structure, which may make your vegetation classification easier and be able to do your terrain models better, excuse me. So I'm going to switch over here again and pull up this really quickly, if it will come. All right. So this is Velodyne data. And again, we're starting off in just the intensity view. And you start to see the resolution. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. This is the next one. They all start to look the same after a while. There we go. So this is a road scan. Now, why would they want this? This was Washington Department of Transportation. And they wanted to start to see the outside boroughs. This was an experiment more than anything. One of the reasons why you want to look at a Regal over the other ones is its intensity, sensitivity. It's going to see a target a lot better, and you can see the power lines and the grid. So when you're looking at, let's say, if you're going to go in and map distribution line, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, this is a great sensor. This particular case, they wanted to see how much out here, because I think this road they're considering for an expansion, and so they wanted to see how much they're going to have to do cut and fill down the sides of this. Now we'll go into color, and now you can really start to see some of the resolution here. Alex, getting back to your piece, because of altitude, when you start looking, this structure here looks like it's empty underneath. That's because you're looking aerial. If you want the side facades, then we'll start looking at different aspect to achieve that result. Again, here you can see some of the shadowing, but you have points up underneath here that are accurate enough, and with a little bit of data smoothing, this all becomes a really nice topography. Okay, so again, I'm just showing this to you as a comparison example, so you know the difference, and what the client was looking for from this result. Good, because this frees up some memory space. So the biggest takeaway from here compared to the other one is the amount of density, but then the trade-off for the amount of sensitivity that you have here. And so that really depends on the engineering spec that you're looking for. All right, so this one we just finished just recently. This was pretty exciting. This was for Kansas State. This was done, as a National Science Foundation research grant for Department of Justice, and Kansas Bureau of Investigation was involved, where we were doing comparisons between photogrammetry, aerial LiDAR, and terrestrial LiDAR scans. The important piece of here, while we're talking about, forensics and site scene recreation, this actually had a ton of other applications that pulled out and were very apparent to us when we did our research. So you can see over here for our over here on the right-hand side, we're actually doing, these are 3-acre parcels, so they're really small, and we're really only interested in 1 acre. But however, what we want is really high point density. And so We flew at, I think, 4.5 meters per second, which got us 420, which isn't on this chart, at 18 meters. So really tight, and then you can see, very similar to photogrammetry, we overlapped. Now there's some things that you want to be careful of with overlapping, but I cover that in a different course because you had to do some post-processing help. But this allows you to get a lot of aspects. So normally in LiDAR, when you're passing, you're going to get shadow, and when you overlap, you're stacking your points over top in such a way that that you're putting points in where there's shadow otherwise. So that's why we did this technique. We did this with, again, a Velodyne as well, and used a small footprint because it's easier for a lot of folks to use this. We had no control whatsoever. And when I mean control is we didn't use any ground control points. This was strictly GPS and GPS correction. So we didn't fix it to the ground because the whole point of this was for relative accuracy. We wanted to see how much feature extraction we could do. And I think the biggest takeaway with this is because of the way these sensors work, that we needed to cover a larger area because the sensor wasn't able to stabilize out. But once we changed the way we flew, we got the results I'm going to show you here in just a second. One last thing, so we have the cloud here, and I'm going to point this out as we go through. Again, this is Velodyne data. This is about as good as you're going to see, whether we have the terrestrial scanner over here in their truck. These are ground reference control points, so they weren't surveyed, but they were put there so that I could tie terrestrial scanning data into aerial LiDAR scanning. So that's something that's part of the project. So again, going back and stressing, having control on your site or registration points is really important. And in here, we also had registration bars to validate how accurate the relative scan was, which we pushed under 2 centimeters for this particular case. So I'm going to pull up this one, and I think you guys are going to like this. This was definitely visual candy for me. I was surprised at how well I did. So I'm not going to even go into the aerial. And we actually have several use cases in here, but I'm going to pull in, again, with a lower end sensor, still survey grade, but what we're able to get as far as the amount of detail from toe to toe, if you're looking at roads, how we're able to pull up these lattice structures, all of this can go into a CAD drawing, and we can definitely pull a mesh of this structure with no problem at all. What we didn't show you here is we also did aerial photography, and we draped all this so that we have the color resolution, but I'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So again, the amount of resolution and the amount of clarity we have here. Now, mind you, we had cross hatches. So we went this way on our scan, which is north-south, and then we went east-west. And we had to do a little bit of work tying those points together using the control. But this is about as good as you're going to get with a Velodyne system as far as the amount of resolution, how sharp everything was. So this is very achievable. We've shown this to a few clients where for site recreation alone, for court cases and stuff like this, where they can take this and actually turn it into a three-dimensional model and walk a jury through this crime scene. It's a huge advantage where if we had just done photogrammetry, this wouldn't be so bad. But we start to get in over here to the aerial, to the trees. Now you can't use photogrammetry in the same way, where we can actually create an environment where you can walk through those trees. So I hope that kind of starts to pull out what forensics has and how site recreation can be done when talking about reality capture. Leo, how are we for time?
Doing well. We got about 10 minutes left. So just to keep that in mind. Okay,
excellent. I just want to make sure I keep everybody on track. Okay, utilities. So everybody's talking about utilities. This is probably one of the harder ones not from a scanning point of view, but from a contractual point of view. These folks are already using helicopters and Regal mounted systems or other types of systems. However, when I've done my consulting, so like I consulted on the California Public Utility Commission grant, I think last year, a year and a half ago now, how time flies. Project definization, or defining what exactly they want, is probably going to be your hardest challenge. The second piece of this, when we start talking about project planning, is NERC compliance. And when you're looking at this, and the last piece of this is safety compliance. Depending on where you are in the United States, and for some of the projects that we've been brought in to consult on, some folks are asking, some utilities, I should say, are asking for like $2 million of liability. And, back here, I think District 11, they're asking for 10 million in liability, 10 million in aviation, and it has a lot to do with risk avoidance. But the other part of this, when we look at this, is while they're worried about the drone, and what that may have, they're also worried about loss. So we had Pacific Gas and Electric go bankrupt because they were monitoring, or they were proven that they were causing fires by not monitoring their equipment. And so I'll talk about some use cases, with this. However, we're going to show you what a VUX1 data set looks like. However, there's only certain cases where a VUX1 data set is really required. And so we'll talk briefly about that. But for comparison, I'm going to show you, this is a top of the line sensor set. With this sensor, you can change RPM, and there's reasons to do that. This is the best case scenario. And so you can see, your points per meter squared are a lot higher. So you're going to get a lot more data, and you're going to get 5-point return. So this is our professional package, but this is when you're going to want to go through in a really quick hurry. Oops, excuse me again, guys. Why is this doing that? You can go a lot higher, so you can do sweep width a lot better. But again, this is to get the most reality capture, so you can start doing some advanced analytics. Doggone it. All right, so this is a quick snapshot of the different use cases. There's about 27 to 30 that we've identified already. And not everything here is for LiDAR. This is actually part of one of our ebooks that we're about to release, talking about LiDAR in the utility industry. But some quick things to look at before we pop into the cloud to kind of start to train your mind, is obviously the biggest concern for the utilities is vegetation monitoring. I think we get 3 or 4 hits per quarter asking about how to do this. And so this goes back to, can you classify? Can you do reality as is modeling, and then can you do the analysis to deconflict? So part of it is how well do you capture the vegetation structure, but then how well are you able to do those measurements to see? And I'm not going to go fully into the analysis of it, just to point out this is why you capture and what type of accuracy you're going to need here. Danger tree mapping is another version of vegetation control. Monitoring, maybe just monitoring growth and where you have to trim. Danger tree is looking at how the lines actually sway, and are they going to actually strike, or will a tree actually fall onto the corridor? Drainage is another one. Canary, or I can never say that right, is actually the slack line. This is what most people out of industry focus on. And then you have your general corridor mapping, and probably the place where LiDAR is the most effective is when you start looking at sedimentation. So, is the structure sinking or settling or moving in a way that in 1, 2, or 3 years, are they going to have to come in and replace that tower? Are they going to have to shut the line down? So those are the big ones there that I'd like to kind of just bring to the forefront, where LiDAR actually makes a difference. And of course, the stuff that I mentioned for environmental and anthropology or forensics also come into play. Why is this jumping so much? All right, so we look at this cloud. And I didn't get the parameters on this. So this is, again, looking at it in intensity view. And right now you can see, and one of the reasons why we want to show this is how much better the intensity sensitivity of the LiDAR is. So they've definitely been this or set this on a scale that's a lot more finite. And ideally, technically speaking, this is actually all color. So you can use false colorization and pick out all the different colors in the same LiDAR band. Not what you're going to want to do right now, but for our GSIPs and remote sensing analysts, they would go through and do that. So now we've thrown a little, throw in color. Now we can actually start to break out what we're seeing here, where yes, you can see the lines. That's great. Now we can start to really break in, and everybody remembers the bridge we just did. One of the chief reasons you're going to want to use LiDAR is photogrammetry will not break out this structure very well. And so LiDAR with very little to no cleanup will pull out this, and this is engineering grade. This whole site was within 1/10 of a foot topography, and you're looking at about 5 to 6 millimeters of relative accuracy here. So you can get some very precise engineering drawings off of this. Along with, we're getting up under the canopy, so we can actually strip this off, and even the ground control here, or the ground vegetation, we're able to penetrate. And I really need a different viewer where we can actually take a slice and show you where the vegetation stopped and the ground actually starts. So, which is really important for classification and setting up topo maps and contour maps and stuff like that. So again, this is the high-end use case. If you're going to be doing, well, I'll talk about that next when we talk about ROI. I'll talk about when you want to use this type of sensor and what you need to be very profitable with that. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, so I'm going to pull this one down. And again, sorry to go through these so quickly, but you can literally spend 2 hours on one use case breaking it down. All right, so this is the favorite one. So we didn't actually capture this one. Our engineering partners in Huntsville did. So they used the new quantity sensor, went down to Mexico to look at this case, and then I think this is the one piece that most people don't understand or aren't aware of. This isn't photogrammetry. This is actually LiDAR. And so using a technique called color draping, we can take the imagery and put it over top of the LiDAR image, and it takes a fraction of the time than doing regular photogrammetry. So this is actually LiDAR. This is colorized LiDAR. And then using the camera, we were able to use the camera to add color to the LiDAR point cloud. So it's a different technique. Why would you want to do this? So probably the biggest thing is when you're doing this type of technology is it's really easy to market to your client. That's one of the reasons I think photogrammetry is so successful is color. We don't have to interpret a lot here. But the second piece of this is it makes your classification identification a little bit easier when you're doing cleanup. So classification filters will look at shape and bin size and characteristic. But when you're going into cleanup, color actually helps the analyst kind of determine where the boundaries are. So that's one of the reasons why color is so important. Again, this was 18 acres. They did this on the regular M600 using quantity. And the reason you look at quantity, and I'm sorry, I forgot to put up a point density chart. One, it has under 2 centimeters of relative accuracy. It has an extended range, about 120 meters. But then the big kicker for the price point, you get 3 returns. So 3 returns is going to allow your vegetation management and getting up under the vegetation a lot better. And the reason why you'd use this in archaeology is so that you could strip the vegetation away. And I'll show you here in the cloud, oops, I'll go back here, of what this actually means. So let me pull this over. All right, so again, in intensity view, you see the structure here, but with all this vegetation and the amount of density here, you're not going to get a lot out of it. So now that we put on color, out here, yeah, it looks great. Where you're going to see the value here is with photogrammetry, you're going to get just the tops of this. You're not going to get all the real structure that you want, which may be fine. If you're just doing base identification, but if you're going to want to get up underneath and pull this stuff away, we have points up underneath here, up underneath the trees, which you won't typically get with photogrammetry unless you're doing like a 3-camera spread or grid. So it's going to take you a lot longer. This is a one-pass deal in this type of setup. And let's see here if I can find the right pyramid for you guys. Let me back out. Here we go. So again, great imagery, but that's not the point. Here we go. So what we're seeing now in Guatemala and other places is all of this is actually covered. And so we're able to use LiDAR to strip off all this vegetation and start to assess, what we're seeing here. Like you can see this is all filled in. So and this isn't stripped out. So just an aerial shot's getting us this, but now we're able to see up underneath and what kind of topography and feature we can actually extract here. So this is why you'd want to use this. And again, the colorization is going to help figure out that this is vegetation and this is actually earth or stone. So that's why you'd want to use this type of modality, excuse me. So I hope this provides a little bit of clarity and to give you kind of a taste of, what customers are looking for, what are some of the different use cases that and what the different data options are when you're looking at this. Okay, so we're a little bit over, but I want to kind of wrap this up and kind of give you a roadmap of what we're looking at here. A lot of folks, when they're looking at building out a use case, they'll focus on the drone, and then they'll focus maybe on the sensor, and they'll look at this. But really, when you're building a use case, you really need to look at the product requirement and the data requirement first. What is the engineer going to want to have? What does he need to certify when he's building? And then what's the workflow? So sitting down with them and going, okay, hey, what's your defined deliverables? What are you going to need? It's going to drive this whole thing. Once you know the deliverables, then you can look at the workflow, and some of the workflow is going to be the same. You're still going to do telemetry correction, you're still going to do control, you're still going to compile, but then, are you going to classify? Are you just going to give them the straight data, or are you going to colorize? That's going to drive what different software options and what type of data products. And again, we cover workflow in another whole section, so we'll cover that more in detail. But then it comes into, if you know what your data deliverables are and the accuracy and what the software can do, then you go back to your sensor and go, okay, do I want the big hammer because I have it, or do I want to, or can I use a more affordable sensor reliably? And that comes into different types of strategy. Whether you keep the small sensor and then you outsource if you're a large company, or you buy the big sensor and you just do it all in-house. But then the last bit of that is, how are you going to fly? Or are you going to use a mobile scanner, or are you going to use composites and registration to do that? So in all of these use cases that we covered, we all started with the end deliverable first and worked our way backwards before we actually built and did what I presented to you today. And then for you guys that are in business and looking to expand this, once you have gone through this process once or twice, then it's time to look at scalability in, how do you do this faster, better, cheaper, and expand out. So as you saw in some of these cases, while we're talking about forensics, at the same time, I'm talking about vegetation analysis and topography and feature extraction and mesh. And so you're going to start to see where these use cases start to overlap and how you can scale your business with that. So with that, I'll just kind of close with, we do have this training coming up in Kansas, and the link is down below. So if you want to see end to end, how this is actually done and how efficient it is, and get some hands-on time, this is available for you guys. But I don't want to beat a dead horse here. So with that, we got our next one coming up for ROI. Kind of made some hints to that today, where we'll actually break down the equipment specifically and considerations you want to look at, kind of leaping off what we covered here in that last slide, to figure out how you're going to make money with this stuff. With that, what do we have for quick questions here?
Yeah, anybody, if you guys have questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat real quick. We'll try to get them while we're still on here. But if not, I'll shoot a quick link over here below the KSU link that you guys can feel free to reach out to MODUS, and if you guys are in need of a more in-depth LiDAR consultation.
Yeah, and I would say, I just bind off here, if this was really valuable, one, we'd love to hear about it, and see what you liked and what you didn't like, so we would welcome that feedback. But more importantly, if this was value and your friends could use this, or your colleagues or coworkers, when we get the replay out in the next couple of days, don't forget to share. Bring them in, and if this is going to be helpful to them, don't keep us a secret. I think this will be good for a lot of folks, in the industries that we've been talking about.